In this century, great strides have been made toward the goal of subverting our republic into a democracy. The foremost tactic of the subverters is subversion of language. By calling America a democracy until people thoughtlessly accept and use the term, the totalitarians have obscured the real meaning of our principles of government. That is a summary of my report on a constitutional republic, not a democracy.
Welcome back to Notify America. Biden says we nearly lost America on January 6th in furious speech calling Trump sick and a loser who uses the language of Nazis and wants to be a dictator on day one. That's a Daily Mail headline about the president's J6 speech. Now, we covered this briefly on Saturday, but I rewatched it, and I have a different take now from what I did a few days ago, as there's much more happening in this speech than just these surface-level attacks against Donald Trump and his supporters. We'll look at it. Also, Vivek Ramaswamy responds to the president's speech, a must-see rebuttal. We have the clip, we'll watch it together, and a bombshell interview is coming up with President Trump and Fox News, where Brett Baier will ask him about David Grusch, the UAP whistleblower, as allegedly Donald Trump already knows David Grusch, was briefed by Grusch during his presidency before he even became a whistleblower. Big news here. But before we get started, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, share the video with a friend. All of that helps out with the YouTube algorithm. Fox News' Brett Baier will be interviewing Donald Trump in the next week, and one of the topics will be about David Grusch, the UAP whistleblower, who testified to Congress about the Pentagon's reverse engineering program, what they call the Legacy program, a crash retrieval program that has been run for decades, apparently, under the nose of congressional oversight. Not even the Gang of Eight or any of the committee chairs have full knowledge of this program, according to Grusch. Here's a small clip from his congressional testimony a few months ago. Watch this.
If you believe we have crashed craft, stated earlier, do we have the bodies of the pilots who piloted this craft?
As I've stated publicly already in my News Nation interview, biologics came with some of these recoveries, yeah.
Were they, I guess, human or non-human biologics?
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
And was this documentary evidence, this video, photos, eyewitness? Like, how would that be determined?
The specific documentation I would have to talk to you in a skiff about.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. So, and you may or may not be able to answer my last question, and maybe we get into a skiff at the next hearing that we have, but who in the government, either what agency, sub-agency, what contractors, who should be called into the next hearing about UAPs, either in a public setting or even in a private setting? And you probably can't name names, but what agencies or organizations, contractors, et cetera, do we need to call in to get these questions answered, whether it's about funding, what programs are happening, and what's out there?
I can give you a specific cooperative and hostile witness list of specific individuals.
Well, something that few people are aware of is that David Grusch knows Donald Trump. He was employed at the NGO, the National Geospatial Organization, a super top secret agency that handles all the classified intel that is swept up via our military and our intel satellites. They're the organization, they're the agency responsible for processing all of that satellite data that comes in, all that classified satellite intel. Well, he was responsible for walking the president's daily brief over to the White House each day, into the West Wing, and delivering it to the Oval Office. And what most people don't know is that he briefed Donald Trump about all of this. All the information that Congress isn't authorized to know, all the information that Congressman Burchett and Congressman Luna are fighting to hear about, fighting to schedule a skiff to be able to obtain a full briefing from Grusch, and have yet to be able to do that. Well, all that information was given to the House Intel Committee already, the Senate Armed Services Committee already, to the Inspector General already, as you know, those groups are cleared appropriately. They have the necessary clearances to technically hear about these SAP programs, these special access programs, these black budget programs. But Grusch also gave all the info, or rather he briefed Trump on all of that information as well. So this Fox interview may turn out to be a bombshell of an interview. We'll see what happens. In another story, a bill introduced in the House calls for the U.S. government to drop all charges against WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. This bill was introduced in the middle of December. Not much press about it. Assange faces up to 175 years in prison if extradited to the U.S. and convicted for journalism that the U.S. government deems inappropriate. The bill, introduced by Representative Paul Gosar, a Republican from Arizona, he says this: the sense of the House of Representatives that regular journalistic activities, including the obtainment and publication of information, are protected under the First Amendment, and that the federal government should drop all charges against and attempts to extradite Julian Assange. Assange has been held, by the way, in London's Belmarsh prison since 2019. In another story, Joe Biden's J6 speech ruthlessly attacked the former president. The Daily Mail writes this: Biden went scorched earth at Trump and called him a danger to democracy. A furious Joe Biden called Donald Trump sick and a loser in his first campaign speech of 2024, saying we nearly lost America on January 6th. The president, 81, launched an incensed attack on his predecessor and potential 2024 general election rival at Valley Forge in Pennsylvania, where George Washington organized an army to fight the British in 1777. Biden condemned the Republican frontrunner for his lies and for making his White House campaign about himself in the remarks marking the third anniversary of the Capitol riot. This is something that I've started noticing. I don't know if you've noticed the same thing, but I'm starting to hear a lot of talk about the Civil War and the Revolutionary War recently on corporate media pundits harping back hundreds of years, making these odd comparisons to saving our democracy and breaking away from the British, breaking away from tyranny. I mean, he gave the speech at Valley Forge in Pennsylvania. Why? Politics is all about symbolism. Remember Biden's dark red and black background during his speech last year? Now that was symbolism. Here's a short segment of the speech. Watch this.
We gather in a new year, some 246 years later, just one day before January 6th. A date forever seared in our memory because it was on that day that we nearly lost America, lost it all. Today, we're here to answer the most important of questions. Is democracy still America's sacred cause? I mean it. This is not rhetorical, academic, or hypothetical. Whether democracy is still America's sacred cause is the most urgent question of our time. And it's what the 2024 election is all about. The choice is clear.
Now, I'll give it to him. I was surprised that Joe was able to deliver the speech as well as he did. I'm being sincere. I was expecting a lot of gaffes and bumbling through it. He did the same thing at the last State of the Union address. He overperformed. And for Joe, that's easy to do as our expectations are just so low. But for his delivery, he did pretty well. I gave him a 7 out of 10 on a Biden scale, and that's pretty good for Joe Biden. But as far as content, the speech itself, I thought was hyperbolic and went way too far. All of these points about how America's going to end, will cease to exist if you don't re-elect me, that's what he was saying. That the election is clear, he said. The choice is clear. You either elect me or America will cease to exist as we know it. This is the type of thing that you hear from political parties who have nothing else to run on. If you turn on political news in Venezuela, which I used to watch, by the way, that's all you'll hear. Look, 10 years ago, this type of rhetoric would be considered over the pale, disqualifying even. But today, it's not only commonplace, but it's the entire strategy of the Biden campaign. That's what I realized when I rewatched the speech, that they have nothing else to run on. The lives of Americans are worse off in every way, for the most part, today than they were 3 years ago. So instead of focusing on policy, they're left with Donald Trump bad. Not even bad, but dangerous. According to Joe Biden, re-electing him to the White House could be the end of America as we know it. Well, Vivek Ramaswamy was asked what he thought about the speech. We'll play the clip, but let me just say, he is the future of the Republican Party, folks. I don't know how he's not polling better. I just don't think many people outside of social media are familiar with him, and it's unfortunate. Watch this.
I think it's interesting your ability to cut through that When we set it next to President Biden yesterday, giving his introductory campaign speech and characterizing the entire race as a trap of your choice is whether or not to preserve democracy. What did you think yesterday about President Biden?
Well, look, he presents himself as some kind of George Washington figure to unite the country. He's more like a George Orwell character out of a George Orwell book. The reality is, while in the name of fighting for democracy, he's actually presenting, and his movement represents, the greatest threats to actual democracy. I couldn't have imagined if you told me when I was growing up in this country, even a year ago, if you told me that one major political party would be taking steps to remove a leading candidate from the other political party from a ballot during an election without judicial process. Yet that's exactly where we are at the start of the year 2024, Will. And I say this as somebody for whom it would be a lot easier for me, too, if Donald Trump were not in this race. But that's not how any of us, from Joe Biden to me, should want to win this election. And so I think it's up to us to not only cut through those myths of the mainstream media, as I've been doing for much of this campaign, but that of much of the Democratic Party establishment, too. That we, the people, create a government that is accountable to us, not the other way around. That's a basic 1776 ideal that should apply whether you're black or white, or red or blue, for that matter. And that's why I stand for principle over politics.